Hey guys, it's Courtney, and today I am participating in the Not Too Shabby giveaway hop, and we are creating some scenes. So I'm using the pumpkin spice everything as well as the You, Me, and pumpkin spice stamp sets to create my scene. I'm using a few images from each one. So I am going to start off with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I like to draw some pencil lines just for my guide as far as where I want to place my stamping. The idea that I have in my mind is that this girl is going to be standing next to a table full of all pumpkin spice stuff, goodness. So I'm just drawing very light pencil lines so that I know exactly where I need to stamp my images. Next, I'm going to bring out my Mini Misty, and I'm going to line up all of the stamps that I plan on using. Now, I don't have my masks cut yet. Sometimes I cut them ahead of time, other times I don't, because I'm not really sure what's going to go in front of what at this point. So I'm kind of just laying out all of the images that I plan on using in the areas that I want to actually stamp them. Then I can determine what is going to be in front of another. Close my Misty door, and the only one that I had to remove is this largest stamp here, and not because the images overlap, but the photopolymer actually overlaps a little bit, so I can't stamp it all at once. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp out this first row of stamps, or first layer of stamps, with Blackout ink by Ink on 3. This is a Copic Safe ink. And I stamped them twice. This is the first time I'm using this stamp set, so I wanted to make sure that I got a good bold black outline. I also stamped these images onto some Simon Says stamp masking paper and fussy cut those out and masked out those images. Next, I can take this large image and line this back up, and this is the only other image that I'm stamping, and do the same thing. I'm basically just lining it up right between those pencil lines, stamping this out twice onto my panel, and then once onto that masking paper and fussy cutting that out. Now you'll notice that there's little teeny tiny leaves off to the left-hand side of this image. I am not cutting these out. I'm cutting right through them, and I'll mask those another way. Just because they're too tiny, I don't want to take the time to cut them. So I lined up that mask, and then I will take some masking fluid by Nuvo. And don't shake this. If you guys have this, don't shake this. You're going to get a lot of air bubbles. I always squirt it out just a little bit on a scrap piece of paper, and I don't squeeze the bottle. I don't squeeze the bottle at all, especially for tiny areas like this. I'm just kind of taking one little dot onto each one of these leaves, and it took about 10 minutes or so to dry. Now, for those pencil lines, I am going to go ahead and take a Copic Safe pen. This is actually EK Success journaling pen. They do not make these anymore, but you can use any Copic Safe pen. And I'm going directly over those lines. But this is where I'll actually create my table. So this back line is going to be a little bit shorter than the front line, just to give a little bit of dimension. And I'm going to connect those lines with the diagonal line. Then I am going to draw a squiggly line on the bottom, and I'm kind of just freehanding this, and this will be the bottom of the tablecloth. Next, I can mask out everything else, my non-stamped images. So I'm going to take a piece of Post-it note tape for the top portion of this table, and obviously this is straight and I have that one diagonal line, so I'm going to line that up, and I can see through it enough where I'm just going to kind of trace that diagonal line, and then I can just lift it up a little bit and snip off that excess that's hanging off. I'm going to do the same thing with the tablecloth, or the bottom portion of the tablecloth I should say. This time I'm going to use the Simon Says stamp masking paper, but I need to peel off the backing. You could see it a little bit through it, but not enough to be able to trace it correctly. So I'm just going to line that up. I'm not pressing very hard because I know I'm going to have to remove this in order to cut out the line that I'm drawing. And I'm just tracing it, going directly over the images that are stamped, and I extended it a little bit past where I actually need it to be, just so that I make sure that I cut directly on that line and I go as far as I need to go, and then some. So once that is cut out, I will line that back up, and we're going to do some ink blending in the background. And I'm going to be using some Distress Oxides. I'm going to take another piece of Post-it note tape just to mask out the sky area, I guess you could say. And I'm just using the grid lines on my work surface to make sure that that's straight across. For the bottom part or the ground, I'm going to use some tea dye ink. I'm not going to do any real ink blending. I'm just going to put a very light layer of this ink on the bottom. And once I'm happy with the coverage, I can remove that Post-it note tape and realign that directly on the line where I left off with the tea dye ink, if that makes sense. You want to be able to see just a teeny tiny bit of it, or else you're going to end up with a white outline between your ground and your sky. So just make sure just a tiny bit of it is peeking through. So I'm going to use 3 different colors for the sky. I'm going to use the fossilized amber, then the wild honey, and I'm going to add the carved pumpkin just on the very top. The way I like to do my ink blending is kind of work my way up from one end of the panel to the other end, so from bottom to top, and then I'm going to go in reverse. So once I have a good amount of that carved pumpkin, I'm going to go in reverse to make sure that these colors all blend. They're not too far off from one another, so I didn't have too much of an issue. So once the ink blending is done, I can carefully remove my masks. Just keep in mind that the Distress Oxides stay wet a little bit longer. They kind of sit on top of the paper, and being we're using paper masks, it may take a little bit of time for that to dry so that you can easily remove them. I like to use the tip of my scissors just to kind of get everything started. Now for the masking fluid, I am just going to take a regular old eraser and I'm going over this very, very lightly. And I'm also erasing the pencil lines that we created in the very beginning. Now, in order to keep this video nice and short, I'm not going to show you all of the coloring, but I am going to show you the coloring of the tablecloth because this is the only thing that I actually drew in myself. I'm going to use some warm grays, and I'm starting directly with the W7, which is the darkest color, and I'm adding a little bit of shading to the back of the table. So when you're looking at one single object, the further back that object gets, the darker it will appear. So I'm adding a little bit of shading back there. I'm also adding a shadow underneath each one of the objects. Now for the bottom of the tablecloth where it's reaching the ground, you can see that I'm making these little triangles, these skinny little triangles wherever my little curvy line is curved up. And this is just going to give some texture to the tablecloth. Next, I'm going to bring in the W5 and I'm just going to extend these areas out a little bit. And I'm also going to extend the shadows out underneath each one of these objects, as well as these little triangles. So what I'm going to do with the triangles, I'm going to make them a little bit longer and a little bit wider. And I'm going to go pretty much directly over the W7, which is not something I typically do, but just to kind of make it look more like fabric. Now, I didn't want to take my darkest color to separate the top portion of the table to the bottom of the tablecloth. So I'm going to use this W5 just to kind of separate things a little bit. Next, moving on to the W3, I'm just going to do the same thing as I did with the W5. I'm just extending these areas out, including the shadows underneath each one of the objects. For the triangles, I am going to make them just a little bit longer again and a little bit wider than they were before. And I'm going to also extend this little bit of shading that I added where the table, I guess it would be just the edge of the table, I guess you could say. So finally, I'm going to finish off with the W1, and I'm pretty much just going to cover everything. Now for the top portion of the table, there's not a whole lot of white space left, so I'm not too concerned with my streaky lines. I don't really have any. But for the bottom, it's a pretty large area at this point. So what I like to do is I like to kind of make sure they blend first, and then I'll go over the entire thing. And you can see that I'm using vertical lines here. And then when I'm going to go over it again to get rid of those streaky lines that we get from alcohol markers, but this time I'm going to go horizontal. So I totally get rid of those streaky lines. So I went ahead and colored out all of my images. You guys, I'm sure, have seen me color before, so there was really nothing different here. I did fix up some of the white areas that I had where my masks weren't totally lined up correctly, and I just used a Copic marker that closely matches the background, whatever part of the background is showing. I also added a few white gel pen details to some random areas, and this is where I realized I forgot to color in the coffee that is actually in this coffee cup. So I just took an E37 and an E35 to add a little bit of color to that. Also added a little bit of shimmer to some kind of random areas with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen. And then I will finish off with the sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink over one of the ink smudges that you may not have seen on camera, but I definitely noticed it. So I'm just going to cover that with this sentiment. But that is it. That is my card. I will leave all of the information for the hop as well as the giveaway in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.